The morning sun streamed through the large windows of Rosie's diner, casting long shadows across the black and white checkered floor. Rachel wiped down the corner booth for what felt like the 100th time that day, her shoulders aching from the weight of another 12-hour shift. The breakfast rush had finally slowed down, leaving behind the usual mess of syrup-stained tables and coffee rings that seemed impossible to scrub away completely. She paused for a moment, tucking a loose strand of dark hair behind her ear as she glanced at the old clock above the kitchen door. 10:30 in the morning. Only 6 more hours until her shift ended, and then she'd have to rush across town to her second job at the grocery store. The thought made her want to collapse right there on one of the worn vinyl seats, but she pushed the feeling away. There was no time for exhaustion. Her younger brother needed her, and that was all that mattered. The diner had been Rachel's workplace for the past 3 years, ever since she'd dropped out of college to take care of Danny. At 23, this wasn't exactly where she'd imagined herself, but life had a funny way of changing plans. The medical bills kept piling up, each envelope bringing a fresh wave of anxiety that settled like a stone in her chest. Still, she forced a smile whenever customers walked through that door. They didn't need to know about her problems, and honestly, most of them probably wouldn't care anyway. The bell above the entrance chimed, pulling Rachel from her thoughts. She looked up, expecting to see one of the regulars coming in for their mid-morning coffee. Instead, a tall man in an expensive navy suit practically burst through the door, his eyes wild with panic. He looked completely out of place among the faded photographs on the walls and the locals in their work clothes. His tie was loosened, his perfectly styled hair slightly disheveled, and he clutched a small pink backpack covered in unicorn stickers like it was the most precious thing in the world. Rachel's trained server instincts kicked in immediately. Something was very wrong. The man's eyes darted around the diner, scanning every corner, every booth, as if hoping to find something that wasn't there. His hands were trembling slightly, and even from across the room she could see the fear etched into his features. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice cracking slightly. "I need help, please." Rachel set down her cleaning cloth and hurried over to him. Up close, she could see he was probably in his mid-30s. With kind eyes that were currently brimming with tears he was trying desperately to hold back. The expensive watch on his wrist caught the light, and his leather shoes probably cost more than her entire month's rent. But none of that mattered right now. What mattered was that this was a father in distress. "Sir, what's wrong?" "What happened?" Rachel asked, her voice calm despite the urgency of the situation. "My daughter," he managed to say, his breath coming in short gasps. "Sophie, she's 6 years old. We were walking together just 2 blocks from here, and I looked away for just a second, maybe 2 seconds. I don't know. She was asking about getting ice cream, and I was checking the time, and when I looked back up, she was gone." His words tumbled out faster now, each syllable laced with the kind of terror that only a parent could understand. "I've been running around the neighborhood looking for her. I tried to call the police, but my phone died. I saw your diner and I needed help. Please, she's wearing a yellow sundress with white flowers. She has brown hair in 2 braids. She's small for her age. She has this little gap between her front teeth." Rachel felt her heart clench. She knew that fear. She'd lived it years ago when her family had lost Danny at the state fair. He'd been only 4 years old, and those 20 minutes of searching had felt like an eternity. She could still remember her mother's screams, her father's desperate voice calling Danny's name over and over. They'd found him eventually, sitting under a bench eating cotton candy a stranger had bought him, completely unaware of the panic he'd caused. But those 20 minutes had aged her parents by years. "Okay, take a breath," Rachel said, placing a steady hand on his arm. "We're going to find her. First things first, we need to call the police right now. You can use my phone." She pulled her cell phone from her apron pocket and handed it to him, but his hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped it. Rachel gently took it back and said, "Tell me the details and I'll make the call." "What's your name, sir?" James Morrison. "And my daughter is Sophie Morrison. We live on Elm Street, but we were just visiting this neighborhood. She doesn't know this area." Rachel's fingers moved quickly across her phone screen as she dialed 911. While she waited for someone to pick up, she called out to her co-worker behind the counter. "Tony, can you bring some water over here, please?" Tony, the 60-year-old cook who'd been working at Rosie's since before Rachel was born, nodded and quickly grabbed a glass. The dispatcher answered, and Rachel calmly relayed all the information James had given her, along with the diner's address as a reference point. The dispatcher assured her that officers were being sent to the area immediately and would arrive at the diner within minutes. "They're on their way," Rachel told James as she ended the call. "Now let me help you think this through. Kids don't usually go far. They get distracted by something interesting. What shops are near where you lost sight of her?" James tried to focus, pressing his palms against his temples. "There's a bookstore, a coffee shop, some kind of toy store, I think. Maybe a bakery? I don't know this neighborhood well. We were just going for a walk. Her therapist said it would be good for us to explore new places together, make new memories. And now I've lost her." His voice broke on the last word, and Rachel saw a tear finally escape and roll down his cheek. He wiped it away quickly, embarrassed. Rachel's heart ached for him. She grabbed a notepad from her apron and started writing down the nearby businesses she could think of. "Listen to me, James," she said firmly but kindly. "You haven't lost her. She's nearby, probably just as scared as you are, looking for you too. Kids are curious. They see something that catches their eye and they wander toward it without thinking. But they're also smart. She'll probably stay put somewhere public once she realizes you're not there." She turned to Tony, who was hovering nearby with concern written all over his weathered face. "Tony, can you hold down the fort for a few minutes? I'm going to help look." "Of course, sweetheart," Tony replied without hesitation. "You do what you need to do." Rachel started making calls to the businesses she knew in the immediate area. First, she tried the bookstore 2 blocks east. The owner, Mrs. Chen, answered on the second ring. No, she hadn't seen a little girl in a yellow dress, but she'd keep her eyes open and check between the aisles. Next, Rachel called the toy store, then the ice cream parlor, and then the pet shop. Each call yielded the same result: no sighting, but everyone promised to watch out for Sophie. James sat at the counter, his head in his hands, the pink unicorn backpack still clutched against his chest. Rachel poured him a cup of coffee without asking, pushing it toward him gently. He looked up at her with red-rimmed eyes, and she could see the guilt consuming him. "This is my fault," he whispered. "Her mother would never have let this happen. I'm failing at everything. I can't keep my daughter safe. I can't focus at work. I can't even remember to charge my phone." "Stop," Rachel said firmly. "You're a parent. You're human. This could happen to anyone. I've seen parents lose track of their kids in this diner for 30 seconds, and they panic just like you are now. The only difference is that their kids are usually just under the table or in the bathroom. Your situation is scarier, I know, but beating yourself up won't help Sophie." She pulled her stool closer to his. "Tell me about her. What does she like? What would catch her attention?" James took a shaky breath. "Books. She loves books more than anything. And animals. She's obsessed with animals right now. Last week she made me promise we could get a cat, but I keep putting it off because I'm never home enough to take care of one. She's been talking about it nonstop, showing me pictures of different breeds, making lists of names." Rachel's mind clicked into gear. "The pet shop. I called them, but maybe she went in after I hung up. It's just a block and a half away." "Or what about the bookstore?" Mrs. Chen said she'd look, but maybe Sophie found a cozy corner with a book and didn't hear her calling. Before James could respond, the bell above the door chimed again. 2 police officers walked in, and James jumped to his feet so quickly he almost knocked over his coffee. The officers, a woman in her 40s and a younger male officer, approached calmly. Rachel quickly filled them in on everything, showing them the list of places she'd already called. "Mr. Morrison," the female officer said, "we've already radioed other units in the area. We have 4 officers searching right now. Can you give us a recent photo of Sophie?" James's face fell. "My phone is dead. I don't have anything on me." "That's okay," the officer assured him. "Your description is detailed. We'll find her. These situations usually resolve quickly. Kids don't go far, especially at that age. Officer Martinez here is going to stay with you, and I'm going to join the search." "Ma'am," she nodded to Rachel, "thank you for your help. You did exactly the right thing." As the female officer left, Rachel noticed James was starting to shake. The adrenaline was wearing off and shock was setting in. She'd seen it before, when her brother had collapsed at home and they'd waited for the ambulance. That terrible moment when your body realizes the emergency is real and it doesn't know how to process it. "Come sit down properly." Rachel guided James to a booth. "Officer Martinez, would you like some coffee?" The young officer nodded gratefully. While Rachel poured coffee for everyone, her mind kept working through possibilities. She thought about her own brother, about how Danny always gravitated toward bright colors and friendly faces when he was feeling lost or scared. Kids sought comfort in familiar things. "James," Rachel said suddenly, "you mentioned ice cream earlier. You said Sophie asked about ice cream right before you lost sight of her. Where's the closest ice cream shop from where you were?" James's eyes widened. "Sweet Dreams. It's that little blue shop with the striped awning. We walked past it and she asked if we could stop. I said maybe on the way back. Oh God, what if she went there by herself?" Rachel was already grabbing her phone again, searching for the number. "What's the cross street?"
"3rd and Main," James said, standing up again.
"It's 3 blocks south of here." Officer Martinez was already on his radio relaying the information. Within seconds, they got a response. Rachel watched James's face as he listened to the officer's end of the conversation, holding her breath. "They found her," Officer Martinez said, a smile breaking across his face.
"She's at Sweet Dreams."
"She's safe. She's with Officer Lopez right now." James let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. His legs seemed to give out, and he sat down hard on the booth bench. "She's okay?" "She's really okay?" "She's fine," the officer confirmed. "A little scared, but fine. They're bringing her here right now." Rachel felt her own eyes filling with tears. She quickly turned away, pretending to busy herself with wiping down the counter, but her hands were trembling. The relief was overwhelming, even though this wasn't her child. Maybe it was because she understood loss and fear so well. Maybe it was because she saw her own family's struggles reflected in this stranger's eyes. Whatever the reason, she had to take a moment to collect herself. When she turned back around, James was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Gratitude, certainly, but there was something else there too, something that made her look away quickly. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I don't even know your name." "Rachel," she said, managing a small smile. "And you don't need to thank me. Anyone would have done the same thing." "No." James shook his head. "No, they wouldn't have. You didn't just let me use your phone. You jumped into action. You knew exactly what to do. You kept me calm when I was falling apart. That's not common." Before Rachel could respond, the door burst open again and a police officer walked in with a small girl wrapped in his jacket. Sophie was crying, but she was whole and unharmed. James was across the diner in seconds, dropping to his knees and pulling his daughter into his arms. The sight made Rachel's chest tight. "Daddy," Sophie sobbed. "I'm sorry. I just wanted to see the ice cream and I thought you were right behind me and then I couldn't find you and I got scared." "It's okay, baby. It's okay. I've got you now. You're safe." James held her so tightly as if he'd never let go again. Rachel watched the reunion from behind the counter, giving them their moment. Officer Martinez was speaking with his colleague, getting the full story. Apparently, Sophie had indeed walked to the ice cream shop by herself. When she'd realized her father wasn't there, she'd asked the woman behind the counter to help her find him. The employee had kept her safe and called the police immediately. After a few minutes, James stood up, still holding Sophie in his arms, even though she was probably getting too big to carry easily. He walked over to Rachel and Sophie peeked out from her father's shoulder with red, puffy eyes. "This is Rachel," James told his daughter. "She's the one who helped Daddy find you." Sophie looked at Rachel with curiosity, her tears slowing. "You found me?" "Your dad found you," Rachel corrected gently. "I just helped him look, but I'm so glad you're safe. You must have been very scared." Sophie nodded, tucking her face back against her father's shoulder. James reached into his pocket with his free hand and pulled out a leather wallet. He extracted several bills and held them out to Rachel. "Please," he said, "take this." Rachel glanced down and saw that he was holding 5 $20 bills. $100. Her immediate instinct was to refuse, but she saw the desperation in his eyes. He needed to give her something. Needed to feel like he'd somehow made things right. And honestly, $100 would buy Danny's medication for the next 2 weeks. It would mean she could actually sleep instead of lying awake worrying about the pharmacy bill. "That's too much," she said quietly. "It's not enough," James replied. "Please, you have no idea what you did for us today." Rachel slowly took the money, folding it carefully and slipping it into her apron pocket. "Thank you. And James, charge your phone when you get home." That pulled a real laugh from him, watery but genuine. "I will, I promise." The officers finished their paperwork and prepared to leave. James thanked them profusely, shaking both their hands multiple times. As everyone headed toward the door, Sophie suddenly wiggled in her father's arms. "Wait," she said.
"Daddy, can I say something to the nice lady?"
James set her down and Sophie walked back to where Rachel stood behind the counter. The little girl looked up at her with serious brown eyes. "My mommy used to say that angels don't always have wings," Sophie said solemnly. "Sometimes they wear aprons and pour coffee. I think you're one of those angels." Rachel's throat tightened and she couldn't speak for a moment. She knelt down to Sophie's level and said, "That's a beautiful thing your mommy used to say. She must have been a very special person." Sophie nodded. "She was. She died, but Daddy says she's watching over us. Maybe she sent us to your diner today." "Maybe she did," Rachel agreed softly, even though she wasn't sure she believed in things like that. But for this little girl who'd clearly lost so much already, she could believe in angels and protection and mothers who watched from somewhere beyond. James took Sophie's hand and they finally headed toward the door. He paused at the threshold and turned back one more time. "I'll come back," he said, "to thank you properly, when things are less chaotic." Rachel smiled and waved. "Just take care of that girl. That's thanks enough." She watched them leave, Sophie's small hand wrapped tightly in her father's much larger one. The diner suddenly felt very quiet. Tony emerged from the kitchen, where he'd been giving them privacy. "That was something," he said, handing Rachel a fresh cup of coffee. "You did good, kid." Rachel sank onto a stool, suddenly exhausted. Her hands were still shaking slightly from the adrenaline. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Tony said, echoing James's earlier words. "You did what you would do. There's a difference." As Rachel sipped her coffee and the lunch rush started to trickle in, she tried to return to normal. But she kept thinking about James's face when he'd held his daughter again. About Sophie's words about angels. About how sometimes on the most ordinary days life throws you into someone else's emergency, and you either rise to meet it or you don't. She pulled the $100 bill from her pocket and looked at it. This would help so much. But more than the money, she felt something else. A tiny spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose maybe, or hope. The feeling that maybe, just maybe, good things could still happen to good people. Rachel tucked the bill away safely and picked up her order pad. 3 customers had just walked in and they needed menus. Life went on. Tables needed wiping, orders needed taking, and bills needed paying. But for just a moment, she'd been part of something bigger than her daily routine. She'd been someone's answer to a prayer, someone's help in a crisis. And though she assumed she'd never see James and Sophie again, she carried their story with her as she moved through the rest of her shift. Sometimes that's all we get, she thought. Brief encounters with strangers who remind us why kindness matters, why showing up matters, why being present in someone else's worst moment can make all the difference. Outside, the afternoon sun climbed higher in the sky, and inside Rosie's diner, Rachel went back to work. But something had shifted even if she couldn't quite name it yet. Something that would, in time, change everything. 3 days passed like any other 3 days in Rachel's life. Wake up at 5 in the morning, get ready in the dark so she wouldn't wake Danny, work the breakfast shift at the diner, rush to the grocery store for the afternoon shift, come home exhausted, help Danny with his physical therapy exercises, make dinner, pay whatever bills she could, and collapse into bed only to do it all over again. The $100 James had given her had been a blessing. She'd paid for Danny's medications and even had enough left over to buy him the video game he'd been wanting for months. The look on his face had made every sore muscle worth it. She hadn't thought much about James and Sophie since that morning. Well, that wasn't entirely true. She'd thought about them a few times, usually late at night when her mind wandered. She wondered if Sophie was sleeping better, if James had remembered to charge his phone, if they'd managed to move past the trauma of that scary morning. But mostly she figured it was just another moment in time. Another story she'd tell someday when people asked about interesting things that had happened at work. So when the bell above the diner's entrance chimed during the quiet period between lunch and dinner, Rachel looked up from refilling salt shakers and felt her heart do a strange little jump. James stood in the doorway, looking considerably more put together than the last time she'd seen him. His suit was perfectly pressed, his hair neatly styled, and he wasn't carrying a pink unicorn backpack or wearing a panic-stricken expression. Next to him stood Sophie, wearing jeans and a purple sweater, her hair in the same 2 braids, clutching something in her small hands. "Hi," James said. and Rachel realized he looked almost nervous, like he wasn't sure if he'd be welcome. "Hi," Rachel replied, setting down the salt shaker she'd been holding. "This is a surprise. How are you both doing?" Sophie didn't wait for her father to answer. She rushed forward, nearly tripping over her own feet in her excitement. "We made you something," she announced. Holding up what Rachel could now see was a card covered in glitter, stickers, and what appeared to be several layers of colored marker. Rachel came around the counter and knelt down to Sophie's level, accepting the card with both hands like it was something precious. "You made this for me. Can I open it?" Sophie nodded enthusiastically, bouncing on her toes. Rachel carefully opened the card, trying not to get glitter all over her apron, though she suspected that was a losing battle. Inside, in wobbly letters that a 6-year-old had clearly worked very hard on, it read, "Thank you for helping us. You are the best. Love, Sophie." There was a drawing of 3 stick figures, one tall with dark hair labeled Dad, one small labeled Me, and one with a smile labeled Rachel the Angel. "This is beautiful," Rachel said, and she meant it. Her eyes stung a little, which was ridiculous. She'd received plenty of thank you notes in her life, but something about this one, about the effort this little girl had put into making it, about being called an angel again, hit her differently. "Thank you so much, Sophie. I'm going to keep this forever." "Really?" Sophie's eyes went wide. "You're not just saying that?" "Really, truly," Rachel promised. "I'm going to take it home and put it on my refrigerator so I can see it every single day." Sophie beamed and then surprised Rachel by throwing her arms around her neck in a tight hug. Rachel hugged her back, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo and crayons. When Sophie pulled away, she looked up at her father and said, "See, Daddy? I told you she'd like it." "You were absolutely right," James agreed. He looked at Rachel, and she noticed his eyes were softer than they'd been that first morning, less haunted. "We wanted to thank you properly. The card was Sophie's idea, and it was a good one. But I was hoping I could also buy you dinner, or lunch, whatever works for you. It's the least I can do." Rachel stood up, brushing glitter off her hands. "That's really not necessary. I'm just glad everything worked out okay." "Please," James said, and there was something genuine in his voice that made Rachel pause. "It would mean a lot to us, to me. You dropped everything to help a complete stranger. That's rare. And I'd like to at least buy you a meal to say thank you." Rachel glanced at Tony, who was very obviously pretending not to listen from behind the kitchen window. She knew what he'd say. He'd tell her to go, to take a break for once in her life, to let someone do something nice for her instead of always being the one doing nice things for everyone else. But the truth was, accepting help made her uncomfortable. She was used to being the one who solved problems, not the one who received gratitude. "I don't get off until 7, she said, already half regretting the words even as they left her mouth. "That's perfect," James said quickly. "There's a nice Italian place 2 blocks from here. Bella Luna, do you know it?" Rachel knew it. She'd walked past it 100 times but never been inside. It was the kind of place with cloth napkins and candles on every table. The kind of place where a single meal probably cost as much as she made in an entire shift. "That's really fancy." "You don't have to. I want to," James interrupted gently. "Please, let me do this." Sophie tugged on Rachel's apron. "Please come. Daddy said they have really good breadsticks and you can have as many as you want. And they have this chocolate cake that's this big." She spread her arms as wide as they would go, which Rachel was pretty sure was an exaggeration, but an adorable one. How could she say no to that face? "Okay," Rachel heard herself agree. 7 o'clock at Bella Luna. Sophie cheered and did a little spin. James's whole face relaxed into a smile that transformed him completely. He'd been handsome in a stressed, desperate way when she'd first met him. But smiling like this with the worry lines smoothed from his forehead, he was actually quite striking. Rachel immediately pushed that thought away. This was just a thank you dinner. "Nothing more, we'll see you then," James said. "And Rachel? Thank you. For everything." After they left, Tony emerged from the kitchen with a knowing look on his weathered face. Well. Dinner at Bella Luna. That's not something that happens every day." "It's just a thank you," Rachel said quickly, going back to her salt shakers. "He feels grateful. That's all." Tony said, in a tone that suggested he didn't believe that for a second. "And I suppose that's why he looked at you like you hung the moon." "Just gratitude." Tony stopped. "He's probably married. He's clearly wealthy. And I have too much going on in my life to even think about anything like that. I didn't see a ring, Tony pointed out. Not that I was looking. Much. Rachel threw a balled-up napkin at him, which he dodged easily, laughing. But as she went back to her work, she couldn't stop herself from thinking about the evening ahead. What does one wear to a fancy Italian restaurant when one's entire wardrobe consists of work clothes and old jeans? And why did she even care? The rest of her shift crawled by at an agonizing pace. Rachel kept glancing at the clock, which only made time seem to move slower. She served her regular customers, cleaned tables, refilled coffee cups, and tried not to think about the fact that she was actually nervous. When 6:30 finally rolled around, she asked Tony if she could use the diner's bathroom to freshen up. "Take your time, sweetheart," Tony said, waving her away. "Place is dead anyway." In the tiny bathroom, Rachel did what she could with what she had. She washed her face, reapplied the minimal makeup she wore, brushed out her hair and tied it back in a neater ponytail. She changed out of her coffee-stained work shirt and into the clean blouse she kept in her locker for emergencies. It wasn't fancy, but it was better than smelling like bacon grease and syrup. Looking at herself in the spotted mirror, she took a deep breath. This was just dinner. Just a simple thank you, nothing to be nervous about. She walked the 2 blocks to Bella Luna at exactly 7 o'clock. The restaurant's warm light spilled out onto the sidewalk, and through the windows, she could see couples laughing over wine, families gathered around large tables, the clink of silverware against fine china. Her stomach did a nervous flip. She was so out of her element here. James was waiting outside and Sophie was bouncing impatiently beside him. When Sophie saw Rachel, she ran forward and grabbed her hand. "You came. Daddy was worried you might change your mind." "Sophie," James said, a hint of embarrassment coloring his cheeks. "I wasn't worried. I just thought maybe Rachel might have had other plans." "I'm here," Rachel said, smiling despite her nerves. "Wouldn't miss it." Inside, the restaurant was even more beautiful than it looked from outside. The walls were painted a warm cream color, decorated with old photographs of Italy. Small candles flickered on every table, and soft music played from hidden speakers. A hostess in a black dress smiled at them and led them to a booth near the window. Sophie immediately grabbed a breadstick from the basket on the table and took a huge bite. "Told you they were good," she said through her mouthful, and James gently reminded her about table manners. As they settled in, Rachel felt the awkwardness start to fade. James asked her about her day, and she told him about the regular customer who always ordered the same thing but claimed he was trying something new every time. Sophie showed Rachel the coloring page the hostess had given her and asked for help picking colors. By the time their meals arrived, Rachel realized she was actually relaxing, actually enjoying herself. "So," James said as they ate, "I realize I never properly introduced myself that day. I'm James Morrison. I work in healthcare management. And this is Sophie, who is in 1st grade and loves animals, books, and apparently anything covered in glitter." "I'm Rachel Torres," Rachel replied. "I work at Rosie's Diner, obviously. And I live with my younger brother Danny, he's 15. "Just the 2 of you?" James asked, then quickly added, "Sorry, that's probably too personal." "You don't have to answer that." "It's okay," Rachel said. She'd gotten used to the question over the years. "Our parents died in a car accident 4 years ago. Danny was injured pretty badly. He's recovered mostly, but he has some ongoing health issues. So it's just us now." Sophie's eyes went wide.
Your mommy and daddy died too?
Rachel nodded. They did. It was very sad. But Danny and I take care of each other just like you and your dad do. Sophie reached across the table and patted Rachel's hand with her small one, a gesture so tender and so understanding that Rachel had to blink back tears. This child knew loss. She understood it in a way most 6-year-olds didn't have to. James cleared his throat and Rachel could see he was fighting his own emotions. My wife, Sophie's mother, passed away about 1.5 years ago. Cancer. It was fast and terrible, and we're still figuring out how to be okay without her. I'm sorry, Rachel said quietly. That must be incredibly hard. It is, James admitted. Some days are better than others. That day when Sophie wandered off, I was having a really bad day. I was distracted, thinking about how my wife would have handled the morning better, how she always knew the right things to say and do. And then Sophie disappeared, and I just fell apart. But you didn't. You knew exactly what to do. You kept me from completely losing it. I had practice, Rachel said with a sad smile. When you spend enough time in emergency rooms and dealing with crisis situations, you learn to keep calm. It's not a fun skill to have, but it comes in handy. They talked for 2 hours. The conversation flowed easily, surprisingly so. James told her about his struggles with balancing work and parenting, about how he was barely keeping his head above water most days. Rachel shared stories about Danny, about her dreams of going back to school someday to become a nurse, about how she'd learned to stretch a dollar further than she'd ever thought possible. Sophie alternated between coloring eating breadsticks and chiming in with random 6-year-old observations that made both adults laugh. When the chocolate cake arrived, Sophie's eyes lit up like it was Christmas morning. She insisted Rachel have the first bite, and Rachel had to admit it was probably the best cake she'd ever tasted. They shared it between the three of them, Sophie getting more chocolate on her face than in her mouth, and Rachel couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so content. As they prepared to leave, James picked up the check before Rachel could even think to reach for it. "Don't even try," he said with a smile. "This is my thank you, remember?" "It was too much," Rachel protested. "You didn't have to do all this." "I wanted to," James said, and the way he looked at her made her heart skip. "Besides, this was the most relaxed I've felt in months. So really, you did me another favor." Outside the restaurant, the evening air had turned cool. Sophie was yawning, leaning heavily against her father's leg. James picked her up, and she immediately nestled her head against his shoulder, her eyes already half closed. "Can I drive you home?" James offered. "My car's just around the corner." Rachel almost said no out of habit. But it was late and she was tired, and the bus ride home would take 40 minutes. "That would be nice, actually." "Thank you." James's car turned out to be a sleek black sedan that probably cost more than Rachel would make in 5 years. She climbed into the passenger seat, feeling completely out of place among the leather interior and high-tech dashboard. Sophie was already asleep in her car seat in the back. During the drive, they talked more quietly, careful not to wake Sophie. James asked where Rachel lived, and she gave him directions to her small apartment across town. She felt embarrassed about the neighborhood, about the fact that her building was sandwiched between a laundromat and a convenience store with bars on the windows. But James didn't seem to notice or care. "I know this might sound strange," James said as he pulled up in front of her building, "but I was wondering if you might be interested in babysitting Sophie sometimes. I have a nanny, but she can't always work evenings, and I have some work events coming up. Sophie clearly adores you, and I trust you. I'd pay you well." $25 an hour. Rachel's mind reeled. $25 an hour? That was more than triple what she made at the diner. She could work a few hours a week and actually start saving money. Maybe even cut back one of her jobs. But something held her back. "I don't know," she said slowly. "I work a lot and I have to take care of Danny." "Think about it," James said. "No pressure. But the offer stands. You could bring Danny along if you wanted. Our apartment is accessible and Sophie would love having someone else to play with." Rachel nodded, her mind already calculating what that extra money could mean. Danny's medication, the electric bill she'd been putting off, maybe even a new pair of shoes that didn't have holes in them. "I'll think about it," she promised. "That's all I ask." James smiled at her, and in the dim light from the street lamp, Rachel noticed how kind his eyes were. How tired, but kind. She climbed out of the car and then leaned back in to wave at Sophie, who was still sound asleep. "Thank you for dinner, and tell Sophie thank you again for the card." "I will. Good night, Rachel." "Good night, James." She watched the car drive away, standing on the sidewalk long after the taillights had disappeared around the corner. The evening had been unexpected in the best way. She'd made a friend, maybe, or at least she'd connected with someone who understood loss and struggle, even if his struggles looked different from hers on the surface. Inside her apartment, Danny was sprawled on the couch playing his new video game, his medication bottles lined up neatly on the coffee table beside him. He looked up when she came in, his eyes narrowing suspiciously. "Where have you been? You smell like Italian food." Rachel kicked off her shoes and collapsed onto the couch beside him. "Long story. How are you feeling?" "Did you take your evening meds?" Yeah. Don't change the subject. Why do you look all weird?" "I don't look weird." "You're smiling," Danny pointed out. "Like actually smiling. Not your pretending everything is fine smile. Your real one." "What happened?" Rachel grabbed a pillow and hugged it to her chest. "Remember that guy I told you about? The one whose daughter got lost a few days ago? The panicky rich dude? He's not panicky. He was having a crisis. Anyway, He and his daughter came by the diner today and took me to dinner to say thank you. Danny paused his game and turned to look at her fully. Like a date? No, not a date. A thank you dinner. There's a difference, So why are you blushing? I'm not blushing. It's warm in here. Rachel stood up flustered, and he offered me a babysitting job. $25 an hour. That got Danny's attention. Seriously? That's amazing. Are you going to do it?
I don't know, maybe. Probably. Rachel started gathering the medication bottles to put them away.
It would help a lot with bills. Then you should definitely do it, Danny said firmly. We could actually stop eating ramen for every meal, and maybe you could stop working yourself to death. Rachel ruffled his hair affectionately. I'm not working myself to death. I'm just working hard. There's a difference. Danny mimicked her tone from earlier, grinning. That night, as Rachel lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she thought about the evening, about Sophie's hug and James's smile and the way conversation had flowed so naturally, about the job offer and what it could mean for their future, about how strange it was that one random morning, one moment of helping someone, could somehow open a door to something new. She thought about Sophie calling her an angel, about the card on her refrigerator that she'd carefully taped up as soon as she got home, about how sometimes life surprised you when you least expected it, about how maybe, just maybe, things could get a little bit easier. And for the first time in a long time, Rachel fell asleep with something that felt a lot like hope warming her chest. She didn't know where this path would lead. Didn't know if the babysitting job would work out or if she'd see James and Sophie again beyond that. But she knew one thing for certain. Something had changed that evening. Something small but significant. And Rachel was curious to see where it might go. Rachel stood outside the tall glass building, craning her neck to see the top floors disappear into the cloudy evening sky. This was where James lived. She'd written down the address carefully, checked it 3 times, and even called to confirm before leaving her apartment. But now that she was actually here, looking at the sleek modern building with its uniformed doorman and polished marble entrance, she felt completely out of her depth. It had been 2 weeks since the dinner at Bella Luna, and she'd finally accepted James's babysitting offer. The money was too good to pass up, and honestly, Sophie was adorable. How hard could it be to spend a few hours with a 6-year-old a couple times a week? Rachel had practically raised Danny through some of his toughest years. She could handle this. Still, her stomach fluttered with nerves as she approached the doorman. He smiled politely and asked for her name, then checked his tablet and directed her to the elevator. Penthouse floor, he said. Mr. Morrison is expecting you. Penthouse, of course. Rachel stepped into the elevator and pressed the button marked PH, watching the numbers climb. The elevator was nicer than most rooms she'd been in, with mirrors on every wall and soft music playing from hidden speakers. She caught sight of her reflection and straightened her shirt, suddenly very aware of her Target jeans and old sneakers. The elevator doors opened directly into an apartment, which startled her. She'd expected a hallway, maybe several doors. Instead, she stepped into a massive living room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city. The view took her breath away. Lights twinkled in every direction, and she could see the river cutting through downtown, reflecting the sunset in shades of orange and pink. Rachel, Sophie came running from somewhere deeper in the apartment, her face lit up with excitement. She crashed into Rachel with a hug that nearly knocked her backward. You're here. You're really here. I told Daddy you'd come, but I was still worried you might not. Of course I came, Rachel said, hugging her back. I promised, didn't I? James appeared behind Sophie, looking more casual than Rachel had seen him before. He wore jeans and a simple gray sweater, and his hair was slightly messy, like he'd been running his hands through it. He looked tired but smiled when he saw her. Thank you for coming, he said. I hope the building wasn't too intimidating. Sophie's been counting down the hours since this morning. It's beautiful, Rachel said honestly, still taking in the apartment. The furniture was modern but comfortable looking, and there were signs of Sophie everywhere. Coloring books on the coffee table, stuffed animals lined up on the couch, a collection of shoes by the door that got progressively smaller. It was clearly a home, not just an expensive showpiece. Let me give you the quick tour, James offered. He showed her the kitchen, which was bigger than Rachel's entire apartment, stocked with every gadget imaginable. The bathroom where Sophie's toothbrush stood in a cup shaped like a unicorn. Sophie's bedroom, which was painted purple and filled with books, toys and a bed shaped like a castle. Everything she might need is labeled, James explained. Snacks in the pantry, first aid kit under the bathroom sink. Emergency numbers are on the fridge, including my cell, my office, and our pediatrician. I've got it, Rachel assured him. We'll be fine. What time will you be back? James checked his watch. The dinner should be over by 9:30 at the latest. I'll text you when I'm leaving. Sophie's bedtime is 8, but if she gives you trouble about it, don't worry too much. One late night won't hurt her. Daddy always says that, Sophie piped up. Then he feels guilty and lets me stay up watching movies. James laughed, embarrassed. Okay, you caught me. I'm not great at the strict bedtime thing. Her mom was better at that stuff. There was a moment of sadness that passed over his face, quick but noticeable. Rachel had seen that expression before in the mirror on bad days. The look of missing someone so much it physically hurt. We'll aim for 8, Rachel said gently, but we'll have fun until then. Right, Sophie? Right. Sophie grabbed Rachel's hand. Can we make cookies? Daddy never has time to make cookies. Sophie, Rachel just got here. Maybe save the big request for later, James said. But Rachel could see he felt guilty about that too, about all the things he couldn't do or didn't have time for. Cookies sound perfect, Rachel said. If it's okay with your dad. It's fine, James said, grabbing his jacket from the closet. Everything you need should be in the kitchen. And Rachel? Thank you. Really. I know you're probably used to more experienced babysitters, but having someone Sophie actually likes makes this so much easier. After he left, the apartment felt bigger and quieter. Sophie tugged Rachel toward the kitchen, chattering excitedly about the cookies they would make and how she knew where everything was, because she helped Daddy sometimes, except he usually burned them because he forgot to set the timer. They found a recipe online for simple chocolate chip cookies, and Rachel helped Sophie measure ingredients, letting her crack the eggs even though some shell ended up in the bowl. They picked it out together, laughing. Sophie stood on a step stool at the counter, completely focused on stirring the dough, her tongue poking out in concentration. Your apartment is really nice, Rachel said as she preheated the oven. Do you like living here? Sophie shrugged. It's okay. It's really high up. Sometimes I pretend I'm in a castle tower like Rapunzel, but I miss our old house. Mommy's garden was there. She grew tomatoes and flowers, and sometimes we'd eat lunch outside. Daddy sold the house after she died. He said it was too hard to live there without her. Rachel's heart ached. That makes sense. Sometimes places hold too many memories. Do you live in a house? Sophie asked. An apartment? A small one. Just me and my brother Danny. Is he nice? Rachel smiled. Most of the time. He's 15, so he thinks he knows everything. But yeah, he's pretty great. He was really hurt when our parents died, so I take care of him. Kinda like how your dad takes care of you. Sophie thought about this while she scooped cookie dough onto the baking sheet. Does it make you sad, taking care of him? Sometimes, Rachel admitted, but mostly it makes me feel good. Like I'm doing something important. He's my family and family takes care of each other. That's what Daddy says too, Sophie said quietly. He says even though Mommy is gone, we're still a family. Just a smaller one now. They slid the cookies into the oven and Rachel set the timer on her phone. While they waited, Sophie showed Rachel her room properly, pointing out her favorite books and explaining the complex social dynamics of her stuffed animal collection. Apparently Mr. Bear was the leader, but Mrs. Bunny was really the one in charge. And the elephant was new, so everyone was still deciding if they liked him. The cookies turned out perfectly, and they ate them warm with glasses of milk, sitting on the floor in front of the big windows watching the city lights come on one by one. Sophie talked about school, about her best friend Amy who could do a cartwheel, about how she wanted to learn piano, but Daddy said maybe next year when things were less busy. Does your daddy work a lot? Rachel asked. Sophie nodded.
All the time.
He talks on his phone a lot even when we're supposed to be playing. And sometimes he looks really tired, like he might fall asleep standing up. Mrs. Chen, that's our nanny, she says Daddy works too much. But he says he has to because lots of people depend on him. What does your daddy do for work? Something with hospitals, Sophie said vaguely. He talks about medical stuff and meetings and board things. It sounds really boring. When I grow up, I want to do something fun, like be a veterinarian, or maybe a princess. Can you be both? I don't see why not, Rachel said with a smile. You could be a veterinarian princess who takes care of royal animals. Sophie's eyes lit up. That's perfect. I could have a castle full of puppies and kittens, and I'd wear a crown while I gave them checkups. At 7:30, Rachel suggested they start getting ready for bed. Sophie protested at first, but eventually agreed to take a bath. Rachel sat on the bathroom floor while Sophie played with her bath toys, making up elaborate stories about underwater adventures. The casual intimacy of it struck Rachel. How quickly Sophie had accepted her presence. How easy this all felt despite being in a stranger's home just a few weeks ago. After the bath, Sophie picked out pajamas covered in stars and moons. Rachel helped her brush her teeth and comb through her damp hair, braiding it loosely so it wouldn't tangle while she slept. Then they climbed into Sophie's castle bed, and Sophie handed Rachel a book from the massive pile on her nightstand. "This one?" she said. "It's about a girl who finds a magical garden. Mommy used to read it to me all the time." Rachel opened the book carefully, aware of the weight of this moment. She read slowly, doing different voices for the characters, and Sophie snuggled against her side, her eyes getting heavier with each page. By the time Rachel finished, Sophie was almost asleep. "Rachel?" Sophie murmured, her eyes closed. "Yes, sweetie. I'm glad Daddy found you at the diner that day. I think Mommy would like you." Rachel's throat tightened. "I think I would have liked her too. Will you come back? After tonight?" "Of course. Whenever your daddy needs me to." Sophie smiled and drifted off to sleep. Rachel sat there for a few more minutes, watching the little girl's chest rise and fall with steady breaths. She thought about what Sophie had said, about James working too much, about missing their old house, about wanting to learn piano. This child was carrying so much, trying to be okay for her father while also grieving her mother. Rachel carefully slipped out of the bed and tiptoed out of the room, leaving the door cracked open and the nightlight on. Back in the living room, she cleaned up the cookie mess and washed the dishes, then settled on the couch with her phone. She texted Danny to check in, making sure he'd eaten dinner and taken his medication. He sent back a selfie of himself giving a thumbs up with the caption, "Still alive, stop worrying." The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic far below. Rachel found herself looking around at the expensive furniture, the art on the walls, the massive television that probably cost more than her car. James had money, clearly, but money didn't make parenting easier. Money didn't bring back his wife or give him more hours in the day.